Thank you, Nitai, for joining us today. We are super excited to talk with you and share your heart and your mission and your experience and all the things with our listeners. Nitai is her last name. I thought I was going to be able to say it. Alex. Do it again. So for our listeners.
Aleksiewicz. I tell everybody like, oh yeah, like this is a sign of how long you've known me, because even friends of mine are like, I don't even try your last name. So don't worry about it.
Aleksiewicz. Aleksiewicz. Nitai is a trauma-informed psilocybin facilitator and founder of Sacred Life. With a background in crisis counseling and group facilitation, Nitai has guided over 100 clients through deeply personalized psychedelic healing experiences. Her work bridges sacred ceremony and modern legal models, emphasizing ethical, long-term preparation and integration, especially for those with deep trauma. Through her 5-day psilocybin retreats, she incorporates smooth somatic practices, breath work, parts work, and shadow work to help clients reconnect with self-trust and healing. And today we're going to explore how she's shaping the future of legal psilocybin care and why honoring the sacred is key to true transformation.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I just want to add that it's such a absolutely beautiful combination to have people who both are intuitive and doing the work you're doing, who are also masterful at organization and taking concepts. And every interaction I had with you guys just fully impressed me. I was like, these guys have it down. So I'm really excited to see what you're going to do. Yeah, like great stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let's get right into the questions. You described your work as blending the sacred ceremony with modern legal model. Can you share how you came to this path and what drew you to working with psilocybin?
Yeah, oh my gosh. I always say to people, like, I did not find the mushrooms found me, because in many ways, you can look back on your path and see all the things that led you up to the point where you are now, how it all makes perfect sense. But at the time, it felt like I was being plucked out of nowhere to do this work. And, we have people from all avenues coming to this work. But what's interesting is that sometimes you arrive at it from a place that is almost unexplainable. So I was basically a friend of a friend, was beginning to facilitate this work. And I guess saw something on social media that, I was talking about probably trauma-informed care and, or something about identity, something where that resonated with this person. And they reached out to me. And approximately 3 or 4 months later, this person launched their first psychedelic retreat and had a co-facilitator. And I remember thinking to myself, as this person was telling me, I'm going to be co-facilitating this. And I had no idea where the voice came from. I had no idea that he just told me he already had a co-facilitator. And 1 week before the date, he called me and said, hey, my co-facilitator's dropped, and based on your background and you're trauma informed, I think you'd be really good at this. And I stepped in, and at the first facilitation that I held space for, I felt my heart crack open. I don't know if you've ever experienced this feeling in your chest where it's almost like heartbreak, but it's different, and it's expansion. And I knew deep in my gut that this was my purpose. And so basically, this gentleman was, I think his heart was in the right place, but he was like a little bit of disorganized, a little bit of a hot mess in other areas. And so 2 days later, when we had our debrief, I came with a 15-page PowerPoint of my vision for what I thought this work could be. And interestingly enough, it included stuff that actually far exceeds OHA guidelines now. And over the next 8 months, we proceeded to build a pretty stellar program. And it didn't end up working out, but that started my path, and I've been working ever since with this work. And so that's how I got to it. And I'm going to pause there, and then we'll talk about sacred ceremony and the medical history.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So for someone who's never experienced psychedelics, what would you say is the biggest misconception about them, especially in therapeutic or ceremonial settings?
So I think the idea that a psilocybin journey is the great white hope. You know, the idea that this is going to be a one and done, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. We're in, we're out, depression healed, anxiety healed. That has happened. But really, and this will come, sacred ceremony will play into this. Really, this is a part of a larger transformative healing journey. It is a piece. It is a catalyst. I often describe it as there is a doorway that shows you and allows you to, in an embodied way, feel what is possible. And that the importance of what that is shifts according to the individual. But it is not, I think, in the paradigm of like instant gratification, the quick fix, the disposable thing, this does not really work that way. And to honor, respect, and have reverence for the medicine, I think you need to, not only in the way that you operate, your preparation, your ceremony, and your integration, but the way that you kind of vet and choose and call in clients that are committed to a different level of work. To me, that is the sacred. That is bringing in this slightly different mentality around it and being super clear that you're in relationship, which is not clinical at all. You're in relationship with a spirit, a medicine that has been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. I have my own relationship, but I'm here to help you develop a relationship with your own self-trust, your own inner healer, and the spirit, this ancient medicine spirit. And that in large part is going to require me to get out of the way or be a hollow bone. And this is so key for me to doing this work. And yeah, I think the interesting thing is we live in a society that does not necessarily incorporate the values that I think are crucial to holding this medicine in integrity. So you can't necessarily just say to someone, yeah, you know, we're going to do this program for 6 weeks, and then you're going to do this journey, and then you're going to return home, and I want you to like kind of stay in the ceremonial space, because they're probably you should know or have an idea of what they're returning home to, but they are returning back to a culture that is very different, and you can't guarantee that they're going back to a safe environment or an environment that supports a more raw, open, vulnerable, persona. And so all of that has to be integrated into your planning. Like, you cannot pretend that we are dropping an ancient island for sacred ceremony in the middle of a modern world. You have to recognize the modern world is all around us. It's here. People have to return to it. They have to start there. And you have to incorporate that into the plan, the transformative journey.
Yeah. And I really love your approach. Especially after I read your initial email and then, our conversations and things, I really got excited about the way you deliver the message of this holistic approach, because the medicine, the psychedelics, the mushrooms, those are definitely most people's focus, and if anything, that's what they know the most about in terms of how this all works. But it is so much more than that. And the fact that, a lot of times we talk about preparation, administration, integration, but you're thinking outside of that as well. You're thinking you can do preparation, administration, integration, but what environment are you doing that in? And is this an environment where you're going to be under different pressures, just considering like all the facets surrounding a healing journey, because oftentimes most people do live with other people, or have to interact with other people at work, or all these various places where there's going to be a lot of outside, what's the word?
Influences,
pressure. Yeah, all of that. And so I think that really does make your practice unique, and it also makes it very personalized. A lot of times when people are healing, once you get past that icebreaker moment of sharing what it is that you'd like to be working on and whatnot, your approach then just helps really connect like heart to heart. I see you as a person. I
Yeah.
see your life. I see you as a whole, and let's make sure that this works in the whole of who you are. So I think that's great. I really do.
Yeah. And there's a way of like, you know, I've been told very, very distinctly in my own work with the medicine many times, like you have to practice what you preach. If you're not living it, how can you expect the people that you are, your clients, the people you're in service to do something you're not doing yourself? And
Right.
so there's been like a very rich path for me to both stay humble, stay on the constant progression of my own relationship with the medicine, my own learning, my own work, and, be super clear that the way that I continuously show up, the internal environment, as well as the external environments that I'm consistently creating in my life are going to also be a major influence. And, I've heard the actual phrase, you must know what you ask of them. And so this is what I live by. And I live by the idea that we're walking each other home. And that means that the way that I show up to meet my clients where they're at again and again is a model for them to show up for themselves and meet themselves where they're at with love and acceptance and compassion and kindness and awareness, even as they're letting go of these old patterns and survival mechanisms that no longer serve them. And, so it's this constant state of like presence.
Yeah. I
And
think it's beautiful, and I think it's felt even through a screen. It I can feel that. I think it's really beautiful.
thank you.
Yeah.
Before we move on, there's two things that I think are really interesting about Indigenous practices that I try to kind of integrate, or that I'm aware that don't fully integrate into the modern world, that I give a lot of attention to. And one is like the paradigm of trying to deal with the symptoms and not cure the disease.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, this work, honoring and respecting this work for what it's capable of, deeply respecting the power of the medicine, means that it's not for everybody. And I worked under or learned from a curandero that said, and this is where my long runway model will come in, right? He said, yeah, so people come to me to do medicine work, and we assess and we talk, and I give them something to go do for 6 weeks. And then I tell them, if you're not cured yet, come back. And then we'll work with the medicine. And the idea is, if this person goes away and does this thing for 6 weeks, they might not need a medicine journey.
Mm-hmm.
If they do go away and do this for 6 weeks, it means they're truly committed to the work and the process. And then they're going to be ready for what you might be called to walk through in a medicine journey. So this aspect of a long runway program is kind of my way of taking the spirit of commitment and the spirit of the overall ongoing journey from Indigenous practices and working it in here. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a part of it. And then the idea of time and the fact that in cultures, like, ceremony is constant. If you're in a village in the Amazon, and you notice that the master of ceremonies, or, the shaman goes and sits in the ceremony. Oh, are we having ceremony now? Okay. But ceremony is ongoing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the pressures of modern society that's like, okay, especially in a clinical setting, okay, your journey is expected to be 4 hours. That's what the OHA says. And are you going to be in and out and done? And your rental covers 8 hours. So for me, that's actually the part that I struggle with, because for me, ceremony starts when it starts and ends with it when it ends. But I've learned to acclimate, right? But in the process and my talk with the clients, we set time boundaries with the understanding that, like, I'm going to continue to meet you. And to some extent, like, it starts when it starts and it ends with when it ends.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So yeah, that's two bits that feel distinct to combining the models.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, so you shared a misconception, which I think is really important, about, there's people often think that I'm going to do this once and done. there are some people who can have a profound mindset shift and make some radical or significant changes in their lives, but most of the time it's actual work that happens afterward and the work that's happening beforehand in preparation. And so you had mentioned that you have this long runway model where you emphasize extended preparation, integration into your retreats. We've only done 1 day journey so far, and you have a 5 day model. And so we're really curious about like how all of this comes together for healing for your clients.
Yeah. So it's a 5 day retreat and it's a 6 to 8 week model.
Okay.
So what we're talking about is in order for me to meet you where you're at, and in order for you to develop a level of trust and rapport, not only in our relationship, but with yourself, it actually requires this, level of kind of emotional spelunking. Like we're going to dive into understanding your idea of who you are, how your life works, how your body works, how your nervous system works. And we're going to start these practices, these tools of how you can meet yourself, how you can self-regulate, how you can begin the conversation within yourself, how you speak to yourself, and how you learn to unfold into vulnerability with me. Because the journey is, as one Indigenous practitioner once said to me, yeah, all the work is before and after, and you get to see some cool stuff in the middle. It is more than that, right? There is a way in which the embodied impact of the medicine allows you to not only have these incredible, like archetypal visions of your own, I call it the heroine's journey, right? Not the hero's journey, which is battling something outside of yourself, but the heroine battles her own shadow, her own darkness. She goes to the underworld to meet herself. And to me, this is what this work is. And so in the space of doing that and being able to do that with courage and with bravery and to trust yourself and to trust the process, the longer time you have to begin the work before the journey, to me, the deeper the journey will go. And then guess what? You've already set yourself up for practices because you've already been practicing. So by the time we get to integration, you're in the commitment, you're in the flow, and you're in a place of meeting yourself differently because you will meet a different self post-journey. And so there's this way of really priming all the aspects of the container and creating a different level of commitment that I think really serves not just this work, but what really for all of us is a lifetime of learning, a lifetime of healing, a lifetime of growing.
Well, and I imagine too this, long runway also, when it comes to trauma is so deep seated in people, and it can take a lot to even recognize the type of trauma that exists and how it manifests. And if you can spend the time investigating yourself and learning, and then bring that into like through the administration session, through the medicine, and into the work afterwards, I imagine the success rates of healing are exponential. A lot of times people have a short preparation session before, just to make sure that they don't feel too nervous. They know their intentions going in. They know kind of, risks and benefits sort of idea, those sorts of bullet point things. And then on the other side, they're working on finding themselves. They're like, well, I had all these great revelations or what have you. How does this incorporate? Well, where does this apply? I don't even understand really what this means, but I imagine there's probably so much more understanding that they have immediately coming out of a journey because they did so much internal work beforehand. And I love the visualization of the heroine of this journey of going inward and into the darkness and whatnot. It's a really beautiful visual. But I think, and especially also knowing, you created this model, you've worked with a lot of people with, trauma and whatnot. And through your experience, through your reverence for the medicine, you've put this model together. So it's very informed, it's very holistic. And I imagine like people are really truly walking away from this experience deeply, deeply affected. And I think that's pretty amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to think so. That's the feedback I've gotten so far. And the 5 day container, just to speak to that a little bit more, is 5 days, 2 journeys with a day of integration. And it's an incredibly intimate space. And I also hold that with great care and great professionalism and great focus on the individual as their own healer because I'm aware. But essentially, I use local practitioners. And the idea is this is also indigenous. Sorry, there's a lot going on right now. Thank you, Alexa. Call me at
Oh,
10 o'clock on a Friday. Um, but this idea that when people would often choose to go visit a healer, sometimes they would go to a village, they would travel to a village because there was a famous healer there, right? In this case, the healer is the medicine. But right now, one might call Oregon a giant sacred village. But in the space of Eugene, where I work out of, I actually tap into all the practitioners here doing incredible work. The death doulas who are doing grief ceremonies, the massage therapists, like I basically have created a panel of healers. And my idea is like, look, this is a sacred rite of passage. We've done work. We've prepared you for your journey. Now you travel, you answer the call, you travel, you come to the village to do this sacred work, and you're met with the healers of the village. And they all know, they've been briefed, they understand, they come on the preparation call, and we're here. And we have created this immersive experience where you are held in the hands of all these different healers, the hands of the land, right? The beauty and the sacredness of the land. And then you have 2 sessions. And in the middle, the integration is a combination of, I always take into account embodiment. So it's a physical, emotional, and spiritual integration day between journeys. And then, we're doing 3 integration sessions on the back end. And we've already, by the way, planned your integration week. Nice. Because if you land and it's a rough landing, and, like for me, my responsibility, my ethical responsibility in the way that I have been called to do this work is that I'm here for it. I'm here for the whole thing. And by the way, I can't even think about money because I don't want to talk about, like, I don't calculate that, right? Because I can't.
Yeah.
Because for me, it's not about that. It's about doing the work that I've been called to do with the highest level of integrity. And generally, as often more woo spiritual people will find, is that what you need shows up. When you're living that, what you need to do the work you're doing shows up.
I agree. I completely wholeheartedly.
So I'm really curious about the first day journey versus the second day journey. What's your experience like? How's it different? How's, first day different from second day, or even like people that who have only done a 1-day experience compared to your 2-day experience? Share with us what the differences are.
Whew, this is such an interesting question because I'm not even sure I can answer it. I mean, I can make conjectures based on what I've seen over the course of, 3 to 4 years of leading psychedelic retreats and seeing people do 1 day versus 2 days. But ultimately, what I'm going to point to is that the wisdom of the medicine and how it works with the individual is something I can't explain. So I've seen people come in who were planning on doing 2 journeys, end up just doing 1. And ultimately, the arc of that single journey was so profound, they didn't need to. And then I've seen people come in that needed to, and the second journey effortlessly closed the cycle, closed whatever it is that needed to be closed on the second day. So I can't really explain that. But in general, I would say, because this feels important to the way we do things in a modern world, especially in the legal world, where you have more people coming to this with 0 experience than more, is the first journey is a lower dose. It is in essence meeting, connecting with the medicine, understanding how the medicine works with you and within you. And, if we're going to throw out numbers, like somewhere between 15 and 20 milligrams on the first journey. Okay. And then it immediately allows the individual to understand where they stand with the medicine. And then the second journey is then the conversation of, okay, where are we going now? Do you want to go deeper? Do you want to be taken farther to the edges of your, conscious body and consciousness? Or do you actually want to go back? And so I've had some people have such a profound experience the first day, they wanted to do barely above a microdose on the second journey. And because we're constantly meeting people where they're at, not forcing our agenda on them, then you just say, okay, like we discuss the reasons why and we really feel it out. But I would say that as the major arc of first to second on a more practical level is what kind of arises for that.
Yeah. Wow.
That's interesting. Was that reference, the Amazon, South America, it's known for ayahuasca and they're often multiple days. Did that inform your ideas around creating this longer experience with people?
Yes and no. I have done 3 consecutive ayahuasca journeys before, and boy, were they. Somebody's like, it's just so interesting. I had this idea that it was going to get easier by the third one. Oh no. They're like, oh, don't worry. It's going to and so I wouldn't necessarily say that. It's a little bit of an adaptation actually to modern expectations. On one hand, to do 2 journeys. Somebody comes for 5 days, they travel here to the sacred village. They're in this immersion. They're supported in every level. There is a degree to which it's like, let me squeeze all the juice out. And I wouldn't say that I love this answer, but it's honest. And simultaneously, I would also, if something happened and it did not seem ethically and in integrity to do a second journey, I would not, it would be a no. It would be a conversation. But I would say that there is something now where in the immersive experience, in the way that someone is supported to move through an arc and to be in relationship, especially if they are traveling, they do have their own modern world limitations of time, limited resources, whatever. There is this sort of meeting of, yes, the more ancient indigenous practices of sitting with medicine multiple days and the modern, okay, I'm making a pilgrimage. We don't often make pilgrimages. So let's really dive in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really do appreciate how what you've created works. It works within the legal model that Oregon has set up. It also honors the medicine and it keeps perspective about the world that we live in. This is now. And so being conscientious of your journeyers in that way, it really does. I feel like over and over you've helped to kind of reiterate this is a space where so many people can feel like there is a very real approach you take that they will be able to carry back into their real lives with them. It is something that you've found a way to make sustainable for them in their lives. And that's really important because, a lot of times you can go to ceremonial experiences and you're trying so hard to hold on to that tight and keep it the way it was and bring it back into your life with you. And often that's very difficult to sustain. And so this beautiful practice that you've made, this village that you've created, this safe place, also was done just with such, not just wisdom, but knowledge. And it's made for this time, for this day, for this time. And I think that's pretty unique actually to find among any practices and centers that we've, at least that we know of here, you know.
Thank you.
You used the term previously. I don't think you said it right now, but brutiful, mix of brutal and beautiful to describe the human experience. So, how does this concept show up in your work with your clients?
I love this word. I'm trying to remember. I'm not like, I have so many moments where I'm like, oh, this is an urban, we're putting that in the urban dictionary. But I don't remember exactly when this term came up. But, you know, this idea that two seemingly oppositional concepts, emotions can exist at the same time. You know, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And in accepting the duality, actually, you create unity, right? And so for me, there's been this really interesting, I always say that my own relationship with healing has shifted from, okay, one day I'm going to be healed and I'm going to like arrive, you know, to, oh no, like we are always healing. Those parts, those wounded parts remain there. But what shifts and how I experience being healed or being on the healing path is that my relationship to my own healing journey, to my own unhealed parts, has dramatically shifted. It's become kind, it's become loving, it's become accepting. And the reality is, we're fighting social constructs around vulnerability, around emotions, around what's acceptable, you know. And this is not just in corporate culture, this is in, you know, good vibes only, you know, spiritual bypassing, more hippie woo woo culture as well. And I am definitely, the other day it was so cute. I was like, my mom was like, you're kind of a shadow hunter. And I was like, Mom, how do you even know this term? You know, and she was like, I was like, yeah, you know, you don't have the light without the shadows, and you have to take both and be able to have enough of a level of comfort with those emotions. Generally, at least one of them, which you've been taught, it's not okay to express or be or feel. Be that rage, be that grief, be that deep sadness, you know. And so part of my journey, and the journey that I generally find myself walking on with clients, is how do you accept all of you? How do you have a relationship with your protector parts where you start from the baseline of they had a good reason? Everything they do for a good reason. You just realize now that you've outgrown that stage, and they are now actually more harmful than they are helpful. But the way that you relate to them still needs to be with kindness and compassion. And to me, like, when you start diving into those places, boy, it is brutal. It is brutal and it is beautiful, and it is, you are a beautiful mess. And it is.
I know that this afternoon during our meditation, I inadvertently tapped back into a very brutal place that was what I experienced during my very first ever psychedelic journey. And I tapped back into that place, and I was crying, but I was also like so happy, because it is hard to explain, but it is such a perfectly human space to be. And we fight, you know, the idea that be like something beautiful or wonderful or good exists in the same place that something dark or heavy exists. But they can exist in the same place, and often do exist in the same place. And so, and I love, you know, the term protectors, like that really changed the way I was able to process myself, was through recognizing my protectors, thanking them, letting them know, like, you know, that I don't need them any longer. They were so great and they did so much for me, and I'm ready to move on from that. I don't need that anymore. And it's, yeah, it really does, you know, those two things, being able to kind of sit in that discomfort allows you to see the beauty that exists there. You know, looking at your reactions, your automatic thoughts, that whatever it is, as your protectors, and then your ability to thank them, to make it something where you're honoring what they did for you when you needed it. It's very, there's like a big release that can happen that people often aren't taught about, and it just seems almost automatic once you allow your heart and your mind to go into that place.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I mean, absolutely. And your meditations sound like my meditations. I'm crying and I'm happy. And sometimes people are like, I'm like, oh yeah, I cry like every day.
Right.
Because the truth is, one of the very wise things I once heard someone say is you can't feel emotions selectively. When you begin to feel more, you begin to feel more all around. And as we know, this particular medicine is an amplifier and really open your senses and your emotional body. So, I am like, let's just start figuring out how comfortable you are with all of you well in advance, because you might be feeling a lot more of you afterwards. And, it really is this agreement. And I'm very real with clients in this whole space of this isn't the great white hope. And I often say to people, like, listen, you've been working with this particular protector, especially the one that's the loudest, for, 40 years, 30 years. You think it's going to be gone in 6 weeks? No, but now we have a window to knowing what's possible.
Yeah.
We have a window to seeing, like, who you can be. And I'm telling you, I live this. Like, I did my last journey November 21st myself. And man, I'm still trying to live into what I saw was possible. And I have days where I'm like, oh, you're still doing that? You're doing that like BS, And then I'm like, you have to know what you ask of them. Like, this is exactly how my clients feel. Like,
Right.
it's one day, one moment, one choice. Like, just meet yourself again. Okay, you didn't make that choice you hoped you made that time. Okay, how do you have grace? And then you will have another opportunity to make another choice now.
Yeah. So you mentioned protectors and you mentioned parts. We went through the same facilitator training together, but then we had some additional training from a facilitator who was a licensed therapist who was really well versed in internal family systems. And we found the things that he shared us to be especially helpful in processing attachment wounds. And I'm really curious about how you've integrated pieces of IFS into what you're doing.
Oh man, I love IFS. I actually think that's going to be my continuing education credit coming up soon. What's interesting is I am someone who has always been interested in mythology and archetypes and the dream state and the unconscious and identities. My master's is in gender and sexuality, and that is all about cultural deconstruction. And so, and I actually, not a lot of people know this about me, but I used to be an actress. So there was a lot about what is it to assume an identity for a role and understand the thoughts and feelings, motivations, fears, and really the deepest internal drives of this person you're actually being as truthfully as possible. And that has informed this idea of parts work. Like, it's really interesting because, of course, like as an actor, you're constantly playing parts, putting on parts, drawing from your own being. And, my fascination with certain occult studies like the tarot and archetypes like the Empress, the Emperor, but yet also these figures of like the moon and the death card in the tarot and all this stuff have really like allowed me to work with this before I even knew IFS existed. So one thing COVID was good for is I had so much time on my hands. I started doing these like hour-long morning meditations and journaling sessions. And I really tuned into working with the chakras. And I, got a book called The Archetypes of the Chakras. And I started working with this meditation that was essentially parts work in your chakras. And I started working with clients that weren't doing medicine work with this kind of emotional, what I didn't realize is it was IFS work. It was somatic, intuitive body work. And when we would feel a charge and a sensation, similarly to starting an IFS session, we would go into it and we would basically meet the age of the stuck energy. And we would kind of intuitively find the event, and we would actually bring in higher self to work with 3-year-old whatever, and we would be in this. And so I had never heard of IBS yet, and then I found it and was like, oh my god, this is what I've been doing this whole time. But I mean, it's amazing, right? It's like, it's so cool to feel like you're tapping into collective wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us. I mean, I'm pretty excited for what IFS can do just because of my own personal experience with it, and like processing, finding, that trapped energy or your inner child at the point where the trauma happened, and like processing through that. And when you're, you know, when you're in your altered state of consciousness and you have, access to more visual effects in your mind, you can actually like see yourself. You can see little you can confront the perpetrator, you can give that pain back to them, you can release it, you can do all these things symbolically, but they feel so real, and you come out of it just, with that weight lifted off of you. And I think it's amazing.
Yeah, and this is the important thing to realize about journey work. Sometimes what's happening in your mind, and also to be very careful with, right? These are actually, the way that I experience this work is that it is both the privilege of a lifetime, and I have people's lives in my hands, right? To some degree. Like, I don't want to feel like I want to like take any God complex out of that statement, and just say that this is about like holding a certain space for the integrity of the work, and knowing that it's not like, trauma isn't really stuff to screw around with, but yet in this space, in this liminal space, in this space where the mind and the nervous system are now somehow simultaneously linked, kind of the astral world and the physical body, you can move really big stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's like meeting that little one, and having a different ending, or having your higher self come up and hold them when you're in the space of medicine, can have an exponential impact,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So I feel like I'm rambling a little. I apologize. That is my iMessage that I forgot to turn off. Welcome to humanity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm curious about, let's see, so you have a unique way, a longer way than, the strict minimum that a facilitator in Oregon has to follow is, the 2 prep sessions, the administrative session, and then to offer an integration session. You've put so much thought, which has turned into the work that you do. Curious about what you think about, as you're going through this and the challenges. Like, you, the work that you're doing is dear to you, and there's an ethical part to that. And then there's the Oregon minimum model that you have to follow, but you're doing so much more. I'm curious, as Oregon's model is evolving, what challenges are you seeing, and that others are facing, or that you're facing, and the way that within your heart is the way to help people heal?
Yeah. This is such a good question, and I'm so glad you asked it, because I'm about to be on a panel of Oregon psilocybin facilitators for Colorado, talking about this exact question.
Oh, nice.
So there are rules that are in place for accountability. There are rules that are in place for, to kind of curtail attitudes or people holding the space for this medicine in a way that is flippant, irreverent, or manipulative. And that is very valuable. However, there are rules that make very little sense in practicality and actually make it a lot more difficult as a facilitator to create sacred ceremony. Like certain logistical things that are like almost baffling to me sometimes. And I can't quite name them all specifically, but I do need to prepare them for later. And then, some of the ways in which they've created, the rules and regulations for service centers make it very, very difficult for there to be a service center, and the Oregon population and the way we protect our forests has made it very, very difficult for there to be service centers in nature. So there is this sort of like divorce from one of the most valuable resources we have as human beings to center our nervous system. And there's like most of these service centers are smack in the middle of like the cement jungle, and it creates this even more heightened kind of clinical get in, get out kind of thing. And, there are things that have put pressure on us as individuals in the state of Oregon to basically fund the program. So to some degree, Oregon is benefiting from this because it gets to be like, we're the first and people are coming here and whatever, but they're actually using our licensing fees to fund the program. So we talk about accessibility and we talk about all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, so the way that you're orienting us toward you as the creators and facilitators of this program doesn't actually feel that collaborative to me. And it actually feels like you are now utilizing my resources in a way that you haven't supported yet. And like a licensing fee is $2,000 and you renew yearly. Like it's really interesting to do a comparative of licensure fees for other holistic practitioners, right? And so everybody's getting squeezed. And you know what isn't good for ethical integrity is squeezing people financially and having them make decisions to accept clients because they're trying to make a living doing this. And I had a very good program that really looked at these integrity issues. And they said, if you are financially squeezed, it will probably incline you to accept someone that maybe should be a no. And it's interesting because I'm definitely like, I almost don't want to tell this story because I know this person is like a good facilitator and a good person. But I had a pretty new facilitator call me up. This is the other thing. I have a medical consult who will also be on this panel who I basically run all my clients through. And it is an added expense, but like understanding everything that's going in and out of someone's body from a psychedelic doctor, medical professional is part of the holistic process for me. I mean, you cannot take that out of it. This is what is alive in our world right now, that people put all sorts of stuff in their bodies and it chemically reacts that did not exist in ancient cultures. So this awareness and taking the time, because it's not in the rules that you have to give someone a medical consult. So now this extra step and this extra time and this extra falls on the possibly stressed facilitator who just paid $10,000 for their program and who's just trying to like put food on the table for their families. Mm-hmm. And then you add to that the complication that advertising gets shut down if you use the wrong words. The people that I've found to be the most successful currently in this industry are the people who have found a way to market around the blocks and challenges because they're actually reaching people outside. They're actually flying people in, but they're not necessarily operating the way I'm operating either. And they're not necessarily sharing clients either. This is problematic. Like we need to operate as though we are one living entity in service to this work. And we're not actually all on the same page, and that's humanity. But it's like you can look at some service centers that can't even take all their clients. And then you look at some service centers that have amazing you know, amazing owners, amazing people in integrity who are barely staying open. And then I see new service centers opening, and I'm like, why? We are not filling the ones we have. Like, let's work together and let's fill the holes of what is needed. And stepping into this work, there were almost no retreats in place.
Yeah.
And I started working with a company in Ashland doing group, and I still do group with them. And I created these privates because it seemed to me to be a gap in the system. And also, it was the way that I passionately believed that I want to do this work.
Mm-hmm.
And so the problems are basically, some rules that make sense and a lot that don't. What actually feels like a managerial governmental overhead that doesn't actually feel truly supportive in a lot of ways. On one hand, I want to support them by not saying that. And on the other hand, I want to be honest. And then the other is sort of a lack of willingness to hand over clients. If you have too many, don't put them on a wait list and keep them out 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, let's share. Let's actually, not operate under this competitive scarcity model. And I even find myself challenged with that. And then this ethical conundrum of being pressed financially and saying yes to people that probably should be no's. Like, I would say those are probably the biggest ones. And,
Mm-hmm.
the story that I was going to tell is, somebody newer was like, oh, we have someone coming in, they're pretty stable. They've been on really high SSRIs. And so we're just going to give them the full 50 mg and see how it goes. And I was like, what? First of all, not all SSRIs are created equal. Second of all, I'm of the belief that a 50 milligram dose is almost never right for anyone. And that's a personal opinion, but this is like, you will be pushed so far out of your body and your sense of human reality that you better really, really know yourself, know your facilitator, and know what this human is going back to. And I have held space for 2 people doing that dose. And I still hold that it's almost never right for anybody. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when this person said that, and it ended up working out fine for them, but I was like, oh my God, what are you doing? And I was like, here's the name of this medical consult. Please run it through them. And they didn't, but they did start using that person in the future. And I was just basically like, you got so lucky. You got so lucky. And people's lives should not rely on luck.
Yeah.
All right. Soapbox.
No, it's great because you are so ingrained in the community and in how we need to work within the model, but also create a program that's actually going to help people heal. The whole idea, or the reason this became legal in the first place, is so that we could help, guide people through healing. And so, but there's going to be growing pains and there's going to be issues that people may not even be taking the time to think about. And so I think it is really important to ask those questions and gain perspective from those who have boots on the ground and are deeply a part of it. And I think that's important for people to know because, for our listeners who just maybe, clients looking for more information on what a psychedelic journey is like and maybe what your practice is like and those kinds of things. It's important for them to know, we don't just consider our own practice, there's a lot less of that individualistic mindset in this realm in general in the psychedelic community. We also are considering what are the how do we make this more accessible for people? We're thinking about larger issues and whatnot because we care about the cells, every little cell of every of every person, and we also care about this on more of a community global perspective. And all of these are the ways in which we can help them understand that we care about them. We care about their safety. We care about their healing, and we care about each other. We want to work together. We want this to be a community. We want this to be different than your standardized medicine. There is something different to this, and we want them to come into the fold, to be a part of this, and to understand. And hopefully, through all of this, through the way we fight for each other and for them, maybe that will impact society as we know it, and maybe we can drift back towards more community living and less individualistic ideals. So I think it's very important to share.
Yeah.
these as well.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly believe community is probably the greatest medicine. I have experienced some of the most profound healing of my life just by being truly witnessed, accepted, and loved for all of who I am, including my wounded parts, by a community. And by having people meet me in conflict and actually be able to own their own shadow parts as I owned mine and to make repair, that has been probably the most profound healing of my life. And it's actually, I think, rare. Maybe hopefully it will become less rare. But that's why I love doing group retreats, is because there is a way to which people really see each other. They decide to do this in a room full of a bunch of strangers and it's daunting. But then they also know these deeply intimate truths about people and find the commonality, the greatest humanity in every other human being. And it's super powerful.
Absolutely. So what's the core message that you'd really like to get out there to people who are new to psychedelics?
I would like to emphasize that this is another way in which you can profoundly learn about the healing that lies within you, but it is not a fix that is like what you may be used to experiencing. This is not a take this pill every day to not feel the thing that doesn't feel good to me. This is, I take this ally into my body to face every single thing that doesn't feel good to feel and shift my relationship with it. And that is actually a deeper healing. That is going to the core. And so if you begin to go to the very root of anything, you better be prepared to commit to that over and over. But you're committing to yourself over and over. And so there is a long-term goal where we need to switch our mindset from instant gratification mentality into, I'll use a buzzword here, like long-term sustainable solutions. And psychedelics are not a fad. They're an ancient practice. And if you're ready to begin to shift the world into what was best of the ancient world as we move forward into an increasingly more modern world, then this is the work for you. And I might be the facilitator for you.